The TARDIS wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this desolate patch of nebula gas, light years from any established jump point. Lieutenant GLE, sensor specialist, traced a phantom ripple across her console. Her brow furrowed in a deep, almost pained concentration. She ran the diagnostic again, then a third, her fingers dancing across the illuminated interfaces with practice speed. Nothing. Just the endless low hum of the ship's drives, and the distant, almost musical static of interstellar dust. But her gut clenched, a cold, hard knot tightening with every passing second. Lie, report. Captain Morales, voice cut through the bridge's unnatural quiet. Calm as always, a rock in the storm, but with an underlying edge that suggested he felt the same unseen, unheard pressure. The weight of an unknown presence. Lee swallowed. Her throat suddenly dry. She tapped a display, a complex web of green and amber readings. Still nothing definitive, sir. Long-range active scans are clear. Short-range passive detects only our own minimal emissions and the nebula's ambient radiation. But there's a signature, or rather, a lack of one, that's just profoundly, unsettlingly wrong. A collective shiver ran through the bridge crew. Humans had learned, often through brutal experience, to trust that wrong feeling. It had pulled more starships out of the jaws of oblivion than any advanced algorithm, any predictive AI. Morales leaned forward in his command chair, his gaze fixed on the main view screen, which showed only the swirling, indifferent gas clouds, a canvas of purples and blues stretching into infinity. Explain. Wrong, Lieutenant. Be precise. It's the made absence of background noise, Captain. Lee clarified, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the urgency in her eyes. This specific gas cloud, this pocket we're sitting in, it's not truly empty. There should be microscopic debris. Faint, almost imperceptible energy signatures from distant stellar activity. Even ghost reflections from our own sensor pings. But in this one, perfectly spherical sector, it's a perfect, absolute void. Too perfect. As if something moved through, absorbing every single stray particle, every photon, every single gravitational fluctuation, leaving absolutely nothing behind. It's an impossible blank slate. A deeper, colder dread settled over the bridge. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders, yes, but also unimaginable horrors. And an invisible predator, a craft or fleet, so advanced it could literally erase its very passage through space, leaving a perfect vacuum in its wake. That was a new kind of terror, something that shouldn't exist. Suddenly, without warning, the Argus lurched. Not a full impact, not yet, but a deep, sickening shudder. A mechanical groan that resonated through the very deck plates beneath their feet. Alarms blared, red lights strobed, washing the bridge in a frantic, pulsating crimson, momentarily blinding. "Report!" Morales roared, his composure finally fracturing, his voice cutting through the rising cacophony. Massive energy spike. Directly astern, port and starboard. A navigation officer shouted, his voice cracking with fear and disbelief. Multiple contacts. No, hundreds. Swarm formation. They're everywhere. On the main view screen, the impossible void was gone. In its place, an incomprehensible density of sleek, obsidian shapes materialized out of nowhere, silent as the grave, reflecting not a single photon of light. They weren't just surrounding the Horgus. They were the void. A solid wall of alien warships, perfectly aligned, perfectly quiet, had been there all along. Watching, waiting. Lee's fingers flew across her panel, ignoring the alarms screaming around her. They were cloaked. Not just cloaked, Captain, but actively absorbing all electromagnetic, gravitonic, and even quantum output. It's beyond anything we've ever seen. We never stood a chance of detecting them. The Argus shuddered again, a more violent tremor this time, metal shrieking under unimaginable stress. Red alert klaxons wailed. a high-pitched scream that grated on every nerve. Sparks showered from ruptured conduits overhead, smelling of burnt ozone and melting plastic. On the main view screen, the shimmering blue of the force shields flickered, then collapsed in a blinding flash of light, revealing the raw, scarred hull beneath. One direct hit and then another gouged incandescent lines across the ship's plating. "Damage report!" Morales barked, his voice tight but still steady, despite the heavy jolts throwing crew members against their consoles. He gripped the arms of his command chair, knuckles white. The bridge crew moved like a finely tuned machine, even amidst the chaos, their faces grim, sweat beading on their foreheads. "Shields down to 12%, Captain." "Port-aft shields gone completely," a tactical officer yelled, his voice strained. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4. Containment fields failing." The alien fleet, hundreds strong, pressed their attack with cold, surgical precision. Their dark, silent ships, once invisible, now pulsed with an ominous energy, unleashing volleys of particle beams and kinetic projectiles that hammered the Fiargus without mercy. They showed no hesitation, no quarter, just relentless, overwhelming force. They weren't trying to capture, they were trying to annihilate. Lieutenant Lai, still at her sensor station, was fighting a losing battle against cascading system failures. "They're adapting their fire solutions. Targeting critical junctions now, Captain. They know our weak points." Her voice, usually so calm, held a note of pure desperation. A direct hit rocked the bridge itself. The deck bucked, throwing several crew members to the floor. An emergency bulkhead slammed shut behind them, sealing off a section of the bridge that had just decompressed. The air hissed, thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. The view screen sputtered, displaying static for a terrifying second before resolving to show more hull tiers, more impossible alien craft. Morales surveyed the destruction, his jaw set. He knew they were lost. But losing didn't mean breaking. Not for humans. He met Lee's terrified gaze, then looked at the rest of his remaining crew, their faces smudged with soot, their eyes wide with terror, but still fixed on their stations, still fighting. "All hands, prepare for last breath protocol." Morales's voice cut through the din, suddenly calm, resonant with an ancient, unyielding resolve. The words hung in the air, a death knell and a battle cry rolled into one. For a moment, the bridge went silent, save for the wail of alarms. Every head snapped to him. Lee stared, her eyes widening even further, a silent question passing between them. He knew what the aliens thought. They thought this was over. They thought they had seen everything a dying warship could do. A desperate charge, a final torpedo spread, a self-destruct. Predictable, calculated. But they hadn't seen this. Not for centuries. Not from a species that refused to follow the rules of a war they hadn't even known existed until this very moment. "Engineering. Divert all remaining power to main thrusters and gravity generators," Morales ordered, his voice picking up speed, a controlled frenzy. "Tactical. Target all remaining offensive weapons for maximum saturation on nearest hostile vessels. Navigation. Set course directly for the core of their formation. Maximum speed!" A moment of hesitation, a breath held, then a chorus of, "Aye, Captain," rang out, infused with a new, terrifying energy. The fear was still there, a cold knot in every stomach, but it was now mixed with something else. A fierce, defiant roar of human rage. It was the echo of defiance. The Argus wasn't just going to die. It was going to make sure it took as many of them as possible with it, because that's what humans do. The Argus screamed, not the usual whine of overstressed engines or the crunch of failing bulkheads, but a high-pitched, almost organic shriek as every remaining thruster, every repurposed power conduit, poured raw, blistering energy into a single, desperate vector. Directly into the heart of the alien formation, the ship was a battered, defiant spear, its forward shields completely gone, hull plates ripped and scorched, but it surged forward. On the bridge, Lieutenant Jiali wrestled with her console, sweat stinging her eyes as sparks continued to fly. "Thrusters at 200%! Structural integrity failing across multiple decks," she shouted, her voice hoarse. "They're still hitting us, Captain! Direct hits to sections 5 through 9. Captain Morales gripped his chair, his gaze fixed on the main view screen. The alien ships, sleek and obsidian, continued to hammer them, their energy blasts painting searing lines across the Argus, Kulkis, Sandus, Kulkis, Goldold. They expected a desperate, final charge. A self-destruct. Predictable. But the slight widening of the gaps in their formation, the almost imperceptible shift in their attack patterns, betrayed a flicker of alien confusion. Humans rarely went out quite so loudly. Morales to engineering. Confirm last breath protocol engagement. Final sequence. Gravity generators online? His voice was a low growl, vibrating with raw tension. A crackle of static, then Chief Engineer Davies' voice, strained but resolute. Affirmative, Captain. All remaining power diverted. Gravgens are charging. Preparing for full oscillatory field generation on your mark. It's gonna be rough, sir. Rough is fine, Chief, Morales replied, a grim smile touching his lips. Give it to them. Give them all of it. Now. As he spoke, a tremor, different from the impacts, ran through the Argus. A deep, resonant hum began, a sound that vibrated not just through the deck but through their very bones. The ship felt alive, charged with a terrifying, raw energy. On the enemy ships, confusion rapidly escalated to alarm. Their targeting systems flickered, displaying spurious contacts, ghost images of the Argus appearing and disappearing across their displays. Internal lights on some of the closer alien vessels pulsed erratically, then failed. Crew on one ship found their footing suddenly gone, then violently returned, then gone again, as if the very fabric of space within their hulls was being ripped and restitched in an instant. From the bridge of the Argus, Lee watched the main view screen with a mixture of terror and awe. The space around the human ship began to shimmer, not with light, but with an invisible distortion. It wasn't a cloak. It was a localized, unstable gravitational field, rapidly fluctuating, tearing at the fabric of normal space. Alien vessels closest to them weren't hit by a weapon, but were simply unmade. Their internal structures groaned, twisted, and then fractured, not from kinetic impact, but from sudden, localized changes in gravity, pulling and pushing at impossible angles. One alien warship, less than a kilometer away, simply buckled. Its elegant, dark hull rippled like water, then collapsed inward on itself, as if squeezed by an invisible hand. Then, just as suddenly, it seemed to asterisk stretch, tearing itself apart at a submolecular level, leaving nothing but a faint, expanding cloud of confused plasma. The ghosts weren't phantoms on a screen. They were the terrifying afterimage of space itself, being violently rewritten. Panic erupted across the alien comms, a cacophony of shrieks and commands. They had seen ships self-destruct. They had seen ramming maneuvers. But this wasn't warfare. This was an abhorrent violation of cosmic physics. This was why it was banned. Morales watched the destruction unfold, a silent, chilling roar echoing in his mind. They weren't ready for this. They never are. The command deck of the Xylosian flagship, the Dorm Vindicator knock, was a cacophony of alarm. Not the guttural shouts of panic heard in more primitive species, but the rapid, high-frequency clicks and whistles of a highly organized, highly stressed insectoid crew. Advisor Kthar, lead tactical analyst, watched his holographic display with growing horror. The human vessel, the Argus, a crude, battered thing of angular metal, was not disintegrating as expected. It was warping space. Report. What is this anomaly? Kthar demanded, his chitinous mandibles clicking together in agitation. His three forward eyes, usually placid, darted across the flickering data streams. The Xylosians had perfected stealth and overwhelming force. They had anticipated a final, desperate burst of fire, a suicidal ram, even a core detonation. Not this. A junior strategist, all 6 limbs moving in frantic coordination, piped up. Advisor, close-range gravitic sensors are failing. Long-range predictive models are returning impossible values. Multiple vessels in the inner cordon simply ceased to exist. On Cathar's display, the precise, elegant vectors of Xylosian starships were now replaced by erratically blinking red icons, some simply winking out of existence. One ship, the Sathaner 7 Ballet, was shown not exploding, but imploding, then elongating into a thin, impossible filament before vanishing. Another, the Stinger 3, seemed to tear itself inside out. The human ship, meanwhile, remained a stubbornly solid, though heavily damaged mass, charging directly towards the Vindicator. Impossible, Cathar whispered, the word a rasp in his species, language. He accessed archives, cross-referencing the unfolding catastrophe with millennia of galactic warfare data. Nothing matched. No known weapon in any current arsenal, not even in the forgotten dark ages of the Great Unification Wars, caused such localized, brutal, gravitational distortion. Our ships are being torn apart by nothing, a comms officer shrieked, a sound unheard in Xylosian ranks for centuries. Their internal structures are collapsing under fluctuating G-forces, life support failing due to sudden systemic displacement of atmosphere. Cathar's central eye widened as a dormant data tag finally illuminated on his console. A single, archaic classification. Gravity Singularity Cascade. Banned. Explicitly universally banned by every major galactic power since the Treaty of the Silent Void, nearly 800 cycles ago. A forgotten atrocity. A weaponized manipulation of localized gravity fields, so inherently unpredictable, so utterly devastating to both attacker and defender, that it had been stricken from all doctrine. A technique so monstrous it was classified as Cunard heresy. He stared at the data. Cunard humans didn't know Ephistit. They simply used Disserit. Not out of malice, perhaps, but out of sheer, unholy desperation. Pull back! All ships! Full evasive! Cathar screeched, overriding the fleet commander's authority. Disperse formation! Disengage! But it was too late. The Argus was almost upon them, a battered, defiant ghost, leaving a wake of shattered physics and evaporating warships. The sheer, terrifying audacity. To activate a protocol so extreme, so indiscriminately destructive, that the galaxy had collectively agreed to forget it, and to do it without even knowing the rules they were breaking. That was the truly terrifying part. When a species fights without understanding the universal lines they're crossing, there's no telling what else they're capable of. The Argus wasn't just shaking, it was tearing itself apart from the inside. Each ripple of the localized gravity cascade, an invisible storm unleashed by human desperation, slammed through the ship with concussive force. Bulkheads groaned, twisted, and then snapped dort, metal screaming against an impossible strain. Lieutenant Jia Li clung to her console, her vision blurring as the world around her spasmed. The air itself felt thick, dense one second, thin the next, a cruel mockery of stable atmosphere. Across the bridge, Captain Morales' face was a mask of grim determination, even as a fresh spray of sparks erupted from the main power conduit above his head. Report! Morales roared, his voice barely audible over the symphony of destruction. His eyes were fixed on the main view screen, where the Xylosian fleet was in utter disarray, their formations shattered, ships scattering like frightened insects. Gravitic field strength fluctuating wildly, sir, Lee yelled back, fighting to be heard. Internal dampeners are failing. Decks 5 through 9 are experiencing micro-singularities. Crew reports impossible crushing pressures, then sudden vacuum. Her voice hitched. They're being pulled apart, Captain. He knew. They all knew the cost. The last breath protocol, an act of sheer defiant terror, was indiscriminate. It was a weapon of mass physics distortion, and it cared little for the distinction between friend and foe once unleashed. But the alternative was polite, organized destruction. And that wasn't a human option. On the alien comm channels picked up by the Argus Despiv and spattered comms array, pure panic reigned. They are accelerating the anomaly. It's consuming their own vessel. A high-pitched, desperate shriek. It's a suicidal attack. Why would any sentient species? The transmission cut out abruptly, swallowed by the expanding field of chaos. The Xylosian fleet, for all its technological superiority and tactical precision, was designed for war, not for surviving a localized, untethered reality shredder. They could evade particle beams, deflect kinetic rounds, even outmaneuver a supernova's wavefront. But they couldn't outrun or outfight localized pockets of inverted gravity, of space-time itself twisting into knots. The Argus, a broken, dying vessel, became a grotesque, beautiful spectacle. It was a singularity on the move, a mobile black hole in miniature, pulled forward by the sheer, unyielding will of its crew. It carved a path through the retreating Xylosian forces, each passing alien vessel shuddering, warping, and then vanishing into a maelstrom of physics-defying destruction. It wasn't just a ship, it was a hammer, shattering the very notion of predictable combat. Morales watched as one of the larger Xylosian cruisers, a vessel that could have swatted the Argus like a fly, simply dissolved as the human ship passed too close. Its intricate, multi-layered hull peeled away, layer by agonizing layer, exposing internal mechanisms, then crew, then nothing. "Maintain course," Morales commanded, his voice strained but unwavering. "Burn it all down." The cost was absolute. But so was the refusal to surrender. Sometimes, survival meant making sure the enemy remembered exactly what they faced. And sometimes, it meant showing them something they had desperately tried to forget. Humans, you see, have a very short memory for rules they never agreed to. The Vindicator's command deck was a chaotic symphony of alarm, clicks, and panicked whistles. Advisor Cathar, his three eyes locked on the main holographic display, felt a primal cold terror worming through his hardened battle senses. The human vessel, the Argus, now less a ship and more a swirling vortex of localized physics anomaly, was still advancing. It was a dying beast, yes, but it was taking the core of their fleet with it. Gravitic fluctuations intensifying. A sensor technician shrilled, his 6 limbs trembling. Multiple internal systems on * Vindicator showing critical instability. Shield harmonics are failing under pressure differentials. Kfar watched in stunned disbelief as another Xylosian destroyer, the Hunter 12, too slow to evade, simply folded in on itself, its sleek hull crumpling like discarded foil. There was no explosion, no flash of light, just a sudden, horrifying compression. Despotin's sun says the sun has passed, leaving behind only scattered debris and a ghost image on the sensor net. This wasn't merely a weapon, it was a cosmic insult, a violation of the very principles that govern their universe. "The human ship's core temperature is beyond critical," a navigation officer blurted, barely keeping his composure. "It's a controlled meltdown. They are intentionally sustaining this. Their own internal gravity dampeners must be tearing them apart as well." That was the unforeseen equation, the chilling variable Cathar had just calculated. The humans weren't merely using a banned protocol. They were enduring it. They were willingly subjecting themselves to the very forces that disintegrated their enemies, just to make sure they weren't alone in their demise. This wasn't strategy. This was an act of pure, unadulterated, self-destructive fury. They are sacrificing themselves to inflict this damage. Cathar rasped, his voice a low growl of disbelief. He pointed a chitinous digit at the main display, where the * Argus, a tiny battered spark amidst a maelstrom of destruction, was relentlessly closing in on the Vindicator itself. They are choosing oblivion, not as a last resort, but as a final, defiant weapon. A nearby section of the Vindicator, Donna's hull groaned ominously as the Argus gravitic field brushed too close. Lights flickered on the bridge, and a few minor consoles sparked, their delicate machinery protesting the sudden, subtle shift in local gravity. A wave of nausea swept through the Xylosian crew as their equilibrium was briefly thrown into disarray. It wasn't enough to destroy them, but it was a taste. A horrifying taste of what the humans were enduring and what they intended to inflict. Distance to * Vindicator, 500 kilometers and closing. Evade. All available power to thrusters. Get us out of this field. The entire Xylosian fleet, a force that had been so confident, so utterly superior just moments ago, was now in full retreat, scattering, breaking formation, fleeing from a single, dying human warship. They were running from a ghost, from a concept of warfare they had buried in the darkest corners of their historical archives. They ran from the terrifying, undeniable truth that humans, when pushed to the absolute brink, would rather tear the very fabric of reality than surrender. And in that moment, they didn't just fear the human weapon, they feared the human will. It was an equation they had never learned to solve. The Argus was dying, screaming its last breath, and the sound was a pure, unadulterated cacophony. Not just the klaxons, though they still blared a desperate, rhythmless shriek. No, this was the sound of metal tearing, of conduits rupturing, of the very air groaning under unimaginable strain. Lieutenant Jiali slammed her fist onto a sparking console, trying to force a non-existent connection. Her teeth gritted against the bone-rattling vibrations. Gravity flickered, lurched, and then slammed her against her safety harness, leaving her momentarily breathless. Engineering, status on core stabilizers. Captain Morales bellowed, his voice raw, hoarse from shouting, but still cutting through the din like a laser. He clung to his command chair, his eyes narrowed against the constant shower of sparks and falling debris. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching. The deck beneath them bucked like a wild animal. Chief Engineer Davies' voice crackled over the comms, laced with static and the sound of distant explosions. "Stabilizers are holding, Captain." "Barely. The gravitic cascade is tearing the secondary field emitters to pieces. We've got micro tears in the primary reactor shielding." A guttural grunt. "We're all gonna feel this, sir." Morales just nodded, a grim, acknowledging gesture. Feel it? They sumlay it. The ship was no longer a vessel. It was a localized cataclysm, and they were at its very heart. On the main view screen, flickering now with heavy static, the receding Xylosian fleet was a testament to their terrible success. Shredded ships, swirling clouds of plasma where grand cruisers had been moments before. But the victory felt like a hammer blow to their own chests. "Lee, can you get me a stable targeting solution for Dorm and Starkus, anything still within range?" Morales asked, turning his head, his gaze finding hers through the dust and haze. Lix wiped a smear of blood from her temple, her hand trembling. Her console was dying, circuits frying, but the stubborn human refusal to yield kept her fingers moving. "Attempting, Captain, but the field is distorting everything. Our own sensors are collapsing. I'm getting phantom signatures, false positives, ghosts everywhere." She grunted as another massive tremor ripped through the deck, throwing her forward. She gasped, lungs burning. "Just give me something." Morales roared back, pure, desperate defiance in his tone. A last shot, a parting gift. The silence that had once defined the Xylosians, attack was gone. Now, their comm channels were alight with panicked shrieks, incomprehensible orders, and the universal cry of a species that suddenly understood it was outmatched not by strength, but by pure, suicidal, unpredictable insanity. They heard the humans, ship tearing itself apart, and they heard the human shouts over their comms, faint but undeniably duller in Indy, an unyielding roar of defiance. The Argus shuddered one last cataclysmic time. Lights failed across the bridge, plunging them into near darkness, illuminated only by the frantic strobing of emergency lights and the arcs of dying circuitry. Lai slumped against her console, her eyes wide, but a faint, fierce smile touched her lips. She had done all she could. They all had. And in that final terrible cacophony of breaking metal and human shouts, as the Targus finally became one with the chaotic energy it had unleashed, humanity proved a terrible truth. Even when they are shattered, they make so much noise, the galaxy will never truly be silent again. The void where the asterisk Argus had been pulsed with an unnatural, sickly shimmer, like oil on water, slowly dissipating into the nebula gas. It wasn't an explosion. Not truly. It was a Tundra collapse, a localized cosmic shrug that simply erased itself and anything too close to its final, desperate act. Advisor Cathar, on the Fornskux's Generentide, Dite-S command deck, watched the residual gravitic distortions on his display with a chilling, almost reverent horror. His three primary eyes were wide, unblinking. The cacophony of panicked clicks and whistles that had filled the bridge moments ago had softened, replaced by a stunned, low hum of disbelief. "Status report," Cathar demanded, his voice a dry, strained rasp. The command bridge of the knotted Vindicator itself was scarred, minor consoles sparking intermittently, the deck plates groaning from near-miss gravitic pulses. Several Xylosian crew members were huddled, their multi-jointed limbs trembling, clearly shaken by the sheer unbridled forces they had witnessed. A comms officer, usually precise, fumbled his report. Fleet casualties, staggering, advisor. 32 destroyers, 6 cruisers, and an untold number of support craft. Simply gone. Not a single salvageable component. The residual gravitic field prevented any escape for those within the inner cordon. He shuddered, a full-body tremor. And the human ship? It ceased to exist within its own field. Cathar didn't need the report. He had seen it. The raw, self-destructive defiance. He had seen a species, pushed to the ultimate brink, choose to become a weapon of impossible physics, taking its own life to ensure its enemies remembered the cost. This wasn't a tactical retreat or a strategic sacrifice. This was an act of pure, unadulterated, species-wide doubt-contrite. He scrolled through the historical archives again, focusing on the ancient, forbidden protocol, gravity-singularity cascade. The Treaty of the Silent Void, 800 cycles past, had not just banned it. It had ordered its complete suppression from all military doctrines, a collective agreement to forget something so utterly devastating and uncontrollable. And these humans they hadn't known. They had simply rediscovered it in their desperation, an inherent, brutal ingenuity bubbling to the surface. They didn't know the rules, Cathar whispered, the realization a cold spike in his core. They never agreed to them. We established a galactic order, a set of acceptable parameters for warfare for over 7 centuries, believing it to be universal law. And they just ignored it. Not out of malice, but out of ignorance and pure, stubborn will. The silence on the bridge deepened. The certainty, the absolute bedrock of Xylosian tactical superiority, had cracked, shattered, by a single, dying human warship. They had faced species who fought with courage, with ferocity, with advanced technology, but never one that would willingly rip apart the very fabric of reality to avoid a polite surrender. Never one that would embrace oblivion as a weapon. The Xylosian fleet, once an unyielding wall of obsidian, was now a fractured, dispersed shadow, its units reporting psychological trauma and existential dread. Their perfect, silent attack had been met not with a counterattack, but with a horrifying, self-inflicted cosmic scream. "Recall the fleet," Cathar finally ordered, his voice hollow. "Return to homeworld. We must reevaluate." His primary eyes darted to the empty space where the asterisk Argus had been. All of it. Because when a species fights without understanding the universal lines they're crossing, there's no telling what else they're capable of. And that, Cathar realized with a chilling certainty, was the most terrifying crack in the galaxy. The nebula gas, once a swirling canvas of indifferent purples and blues, now held a new, chilling quality. It shimmered with residual gravitic echoes, a silent, terrible monument to the Argus and the chaos it had unleashed. Where dozens of sleek Xylosian warships had once stood in an impenetrable formation, now stretched only vast, unsettling voids. It was as if entire swaths of space had been cleanly, surgically excised, leaving behind not wreckage but nothing. These were the empty cradles, the silent, gaping wounds in the heart of the fleet. On the command deck of the Na Vindicator, Advisor Cathar remained rooted, his 3 eyes scanning the main display, still struggling to process the incomprehensible. The chaotic clicks and shrieks had long faded, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence, punctuated only by the low, mournful hum of damaged systems. His crew, usually models of disciplined efficiency, moved with a hesitant, almost fearful slowness. The psychological toll of witnessing ships, entire lives, simply unmade by an unseen force, was profound. "Rescan all sectors, deep probe, long range," Cathar ordered, his voice flat, devoid of its usual authority. "Confirm no residual energy signatures from the human vessel. Confirm the anomaly has fully dissipated." He didn't expect a different answer, but the methodical process was a small anchor in a universe suddenly bereft of certainty. The junior strategist, still visibly shaken, responded with a shaky whistle. "Confirmed, advisor. The human ship, the Stodargus, is no more. Its gravitic field collapsed, consuming itself and all within its immediate vicinity. No debris larger than a microparticle detected. It is utterly gone. Gone. Vanished." But the ghost of its passing lingered, a chilling phantom that would haunt Xylosian's strategic doctrine for cycles to come. Cathar's mind raced through the data he'd accessed, the ancient protocols, the galactic ban, Toyn's gravity singularity cascade, a weapon of such self-destructive magnitude, so inherently unstable, so universally feared, that it had been wiped from common knowledge. And yet humanity, in their desperate fight, had not only rediscovered it, but had weaponized their own demise with a terrifying, brutal efficiency. He saw it so clearly now. The Xylosians had approached this battle with the cold, calculated precision of predators. They had underestimated not humanity's technology, but its nature. They had expected a fight within the established rules, a desperate but understandable struggle for survival. Instead, they got a species that tore up the rulebook mid-battle, using its own death as the ultimate weapon. They didn't know it was banned, Cathar murmured aloud, a realization that felt like a fresh wound. They never agreed to the Treaty of the Silent Void. For them, it was just a solution. An extreme solution, but a solution nonetheless. The sheer terrifying unpredictability of it. The willingness to embrace mutual destruction with such fervent resolve. It wasn't just a tactical lesson. It was an existential one. How do you fight a foe who, when cornered, is willing to set the entire universe on fire, including themselves, just to make sure you remember their name? You couldn't. Not without risking everything. The Xylosian fleet, the pride of their stellar dominion, limped away from the nebula, a scattered, broken formation. Their losses were immense, yes, but the deeper damage was to their absolute certainty, their long-held belief in an ordered, predictable galaxy. Cathar looked out at the silent, shimmering void, at the empty cradles where powerful warships once lay. He understood now. Humanity wasn't just a new species to conquer. They were a force of nature, untamed and utterly terrifying. A species that, when pushed, would remind the entire galaxy that the most dangerous weapon in existence isn't forged from metal or energy, but from pure, unadulterated human stubbornness. The cold dread that settled over the Xylosian fleet wasn't born of defeat in a conventional sense. Their technology remained superior, their numbers still vast. No, this was a deeper, more insidious fear, a terror that gnawed at the very foundations of their galactic understanding. Advisor Cathar, back on the damaged Norj, watched the nebula's slow, agonizing recovery on his display, the phantom shimmer of space where the asterisk Argus had been. His 6 limbs were still. His mandibles clicked only softly, contemplatively. He wasn't looking at wreckage, he was looking at an open wound in galactic certainty. "The Treaty of the Silent Void," Cathar stated, his voice barely above a whisper. Yet it echoed with chilling weight across the silent bridge. "We codified it, enforced it. We believed we had erased the very concept of the gravity singularity cascade from existence. Buried it. Forgot it. But they just did it." His crew remained quiet, the shock still palpable. They had witnessed the unthinkable. Whole vessels, teeming with life, simply unmade. Not torn by a conventional blast, but erased by a localized, self-consuming physics anomaly. The Argus, that crude human ship, had become a weaponized void, a spear of extinction, driven by a desperate, unyielding will. "We underestimated them," Cathar continued, looking out at his solemn crew. His multifaceted eyes, usually sharp with analytical calculation, now held a haunted, almost awestruck quality. Not their technology, which is crude. Not their numbers, which are laughably small. But their resolve. Their refusal to acknowledge an ending we considered absolute. They would rather unmake themselves and shatter the universe around them than simply surrender. The implications were profound. For centuries, galactic warfare had operated within unspoken, mutually agreed-upon parameters. Certain weapons, certain tactics, were simply off-limits, deemed too destructive, too unpredictable, too costly for all involved. But humanity, new to the galactic stage, had been blissfully, terrifyingly ignorant of these ancient accords. They had dug up a forgotten horror, polished it with their desperation, and thrown it back at an unprepared galaxy. The cost to them was total, a junior strategist ventured, his voice a series of uneasy clicks. No survivors. Not a single fragment of the Argus remains. They simply sacrificed themselves entirely. Precisely, Cathar replied, a grim nod of his head carapace. And in doing so they have inflicted a wound that will ripple through the galaxy for generations. We retreated. Our superior fleet, shattered by a single dying vessel. Not because of a tactical miscalculation, but because we confronted a species willing to become a fundamental violation of cosmic law itself. The Xylosian fleet, dispersed and shaken, began its long journey home, not in triumph, but in a state of profound existential unease. They had seen the spear of extinction. It wasn't a superweapon built in a lab. It was the raw, unadulterated will of humanity, turned inwards and then outwards, consuming everything. Cathar looked one last time at the lingering distortion in the nebula, then turned away. He understood now. You can ban a weapon, you can erase the memory of it from records, but you can never truly ban a species. Sheer, stubborn refusal to die. And in that refusal, they could become the most terrifying weapon the galaxy had ever seen. The holographic projection shimmered in the sterile command chamber of the Xylosian High Council, casting an eerie, pale light on the faces of the assembled elders. It was a simulation, a playback of the last moments of the human vessel, the Badestam Smatchers, now rendered in stark, terrifying detail. Ships, dozens of them, simply imploded, twisted or evaporated as the human craft, a tattered, burning spear, carved its suicidal path. The nebula gas around it pulsed with an angry, unnatural sheen, as if the very fabric of space was bruised and bleeding. High Elder Virak, his crystalline eyes wide with disbelief, watched the replay for the third time. The rhythmic click of his clawed digits against the armrest of his command throne was the only sound in the vast chamber. The casual, almost dismissive confidence of moments ago had been utterly shattered. This wasn't warfare. This was something else. Something ancient, forgotten, and horrifyingly new. Advisor Cathar's last transmission. A junior aide chirped, his voice trembling slightly. He describes it as a gravity singularity cascade. A self-consuming field designed to tear local space-time apart. It destroyed the Argus, along with our forces. Varak's mandibles clicked, a sound of profound distress. Destroyed Asterisk along with them? This is not a weapon, then. It is a shared annihilation. A mutually assured unmaking. He turned his gaze, heavy with the weight of centuries of galactic peace, to the aide. Are you certain? No survivors? No attempt to extract themselves? None, High Elder. The field was completely unstable, indiscriminate. It engulfed the human ship entirely. Sensor data confirms a total cessation of all matter at the point of the anomaly's collapse. There is nothing left. The aide's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. Admiral Zythar's fleet, nearly 40% of our forward deployment obliterated. Not by force of arms, but by absence. The visual simulation on the holodeble showed the Xylosian fleet's rapid dispersal, their perfectly ordered ranks breaking into panicked flight. The dark, sleek vessels, symbols of their galactic dominance, were reduced to fleeing insects, desperately trying to outrun an invisible, localized cosmic horror. The sky bled, not with plasma and fire, but with the terrifying, incomprehensible disappearance of their own. This last breath protocol, Virak rasped, accessing Cathar's frantic follow-up report. He cites ancient, banned galactic treaties. A protocol deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable, too monstrous for any sentient species to employ. He states the humans were unaware of its forbidden nature. A heavy silence descended upon the council. This was the truly chilling realization. The humans hadn't broken an established rule out of defiance. They had broken it out of ignorance. They hadn't known the galactic etiquette for warfare, hadn't signed the treaties, hadn't seen the horrors that led to such extreme measures being permanently shelved. They had simply done what they felt they had to do. They did not know, Virak repeated, the words hanging like a shroud in the air. They merely found a way to not die quietly. to tear the universe apart with them if necessary. The implications rippled through his ancient mind, a cold, unbidden fear. How do you fight a species that rewrites the very definition of surrender without even realizing it? A species that will, quite literally, make the sky bleed rather than break. It changed everything. The sterile, cool air of the Xylosian High Council chamber did little to cool the fire of unease that now burned within High Elder Verac. He had watched the simulation countless times, the silent obliteration of his fleet, the self-consuming death of the human warship Argus. Each replay brought not understanding, but a deeper, more profound dread. The holographic projection of the nebula, now purged of the human anomaly but still shimmering with residual fear, felt like a gaping wound in their ordered galaxy. "The full report is in, High Elder," a junior aide chirped, his voice subdued, stripped of its usual bureaucratic confidence. "Admiral Zythar survivors are undergoing psychological reintegration. The consensus is profound trauma, not from battle, but from witnessing a violation of physics, of reality itself." Verac's multifaceted eyes, usually sharp and discerning, now held a haunted quality. A violation we, collectively, chose to forget. And these humans, they simply found a way to remember. Or, perhaps, to reinvent. He turned to the other council members, their faces grim, chitinous mandibles clicking nervously. "We structured galactic peace on the premise of mutually acceptable warfare. We banned weapons like the gravity singularity cascade because no species, no thinking species would ever willingly unleash such a terror. Not on an enemy, and certainly not upon themselves." The chilling silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. The Xylosians, along with the other elder species of the galaxy, had spent centuries cultivating an advanced, yet controlled form of conflict. There were lines. Always lines. But humanity, new to the galactic stage, had blithely, terrifyingly crossed every single one without even knowing they existed. "They didn't sign the Treaty of the Silent Void," another elder rasped, his voice tinged with a brittle, intellectual fear. "They aren't bound by its prescriptions." For them, it was merely a tactical option, a last resort to avoid annihilation. "A last resort that costs them everything," Verac countered, his voice a low growl. "Their ship, their crew, utterly unmade. Yet in doing so, they have shattered the very notion of predictable warfare for every other species in this galaxy. We thought we had contained the monstrous possibilities, buried them deep. But they dug it up. They woke a storm. The storm wasn't just the localized gravitational chaos unleashed by the Argus. No. It was the storm of uncertainty, of existential reevaluation that now swept through the Xylosian High Command. How do you plan for a foe that views self-immolation as a valid, even Teet's preferred, tactical outcome? How do you establish rules with a species whose instinct for survival trumps all known galactic conventions? "We had a future planned for them," the aide mumbled, adjusting a flickering data slate. "Integration. Assimilation. A measured, controlled engagement if they resisted." Verac slammed a clawed digit onto the holodeble, the projection rippling. "That future is gone. They have shown us a different path. A brutal, defiant path, where the cost of victory is measured not in ships, but in the very fabric of existence. We sought to control them, to teach them. But they have taught us instead." The Xylosian fleet, a symbol of dominance and order, now moved with a new, subtle hesitation. They knew that somewhere out in the void, there were more human ships, more human crews, capable of this same terrifying act. The galaxy, once a predictable expanse, had suddenly become wilder, more dangerous. Because humanity, when pushed, will always find a way to not just survive, but to make sure that the universe itself remembers the storm they woke. It's a habit, after all. A very old, very human habit.